Hello and welcome to episode 309 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. Joining me today, it's Friday, so it's time for Finnegan Fridays. Also joining me, former Obama speechwriter, author, and columnist David Litt will be here. I am Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Stand up. Yeah, hello, my friends, and welcome to your Friday. If you're listening on Friday, you might be a day or two behind. You might have just discovered the podcast. I am very excited to have you no matter what. Great to be on the journey of life along with you as we talk about all of the issues every day that matter to you and your family and your community and your planet. Please support the podcast with a paid subscription. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or just click the paid subscription link in the show notes. So I'm driving up to my folks, which is about 4 hours away. I live in Rockland County, just north of New York City, and I'm going to see mom and dad in Syracuse. I'm bringing my daughters, their granddaughters, the first time we will have gone there since over a year ago, and really excited to be with my parents for the weekend. And for that reason, I'm unable to both host the Zoom last night, hang out, and make a really robust news segment today because I'm not bringing my equipment. So you're going to have to get your news recap somewhere else. I'm so sorry to turn you away from the podcast, but I have two great guests joining me right now. Very excited to have you listen to my conversations with both Christian Finnegan and David Litt. I know it's been a pretty white guy week. I'm sorry about that. And always trying to get all kinds of diverse voices and on the podcast, which is daily, usually 2 guests a day. So let me know who you want me to book and suggest. And I'm doing my best. I really appreciate all of your suggestions. Email me anything you want. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, so let's start with Christian Finnegan, who is one of my all-time favorite stand-up comedians who I came up with in the New York comedy scene. You may have seen him back on the day on VH1's Best Week Ever or The Chappelle Show. He's a nationally touring stand-up comedian who has done his own Comedy Central special. He's got several albums out, which you should buy, and I just love talking to him about anything. He has just moved back full-time into New York City. They have a little place upstate, but we talked about the move and cities in general, which he's always great to talk about, as well as recapping some other news stories from the week and getting off on a tangent. Religion, great conversation, always a great conversation, so solid, so smart and funny. Here now, at Christ Finnegan on Twitter, Christian Finnegan. Finnegan Fridays. I wish I was recording all that. I just said, in case I'm going to go ahead and try to recreate it, I said I can only do about 30 minutes because I have to go get the skis in the car because I'm leaving right after this. And then I said, that's the whitest thing I've ever said. And you said,
oh, I've heard you say whiter.
I've said a lot of white things. I've said a lot of dad things.
I mean,
too.
So am I. I mean, we are as Caucasian as Caucasian gets.
Well, yes and
you
no.
And I.
I mean,
well, you actually have a little more. What is your ethnic background?
Swarthy.
Which is always weird when people ask that now. It feels like such a loaded question now. Like when I was a kid, people would just ask them that, and maybe it was loaded then, and I just wasn't mature enough to understand that there was something behind it. But now it just feels like, all right, why does that matter? And what are you trying? Like what angle? Like what judgment are you trying to come to about me?
Case by case, though. I mean, like if you know someone pretty well, then I feel like it's a completely fair question because it's an interesting answer to know. I think.
Sure.
For example,
what is the answer?
I don't identify with much ethnicity because I feel like a poser when I do. It's a weird kind of feeling. It's not a struggle, but in a way it is because I married a first generation Italian who's all Italian, whose family lives in Italy. But my mom was Sicilian and his dad was Lebanese. So he's half Sicilian, half Lebanese. And my mom was like Irish mostly. And so I'm this.
You know what that makes you? An American.
Right.
But melting pot.
But nothing. Because of my parents, we didn't have any ethnic stuff. No offense to my mom and dad, but there wasn't music and food. There was some food related stuff from my dad's side. But there wasn't much
Lebanese
culture. Both Lebanese and Italian. There was stuff, but my dad eat anything, and he would try to serve us anything too. But mostly there's nothing, and I don't know what that means. What about you? Do you have any connection to your ethnicity, whatever it is?
To Ireland, I am almost entirely Irish. I think there's a little bit of French Huguenot within me, which was a small Catholic sect of medieval France. But I am like almost entirely Irish. My dad's 100% Irish and my mom's like 80% Irish.
What does that come with for you?
Huh?
What does that come with for you? Or what does that mean for you?
Well, you know, Irish Catholic from Boston is almost its own ethnic subsect. You know what I mean? Like, so I definitely feel a connection to that sort of West Roxbury Irish, you know, that sort of culture, because that's what all my uncles, you know, have the accent and all that jazz. And I never really felt much kinship to Ireland in general. But when the first time that my wife and I visited there, she looked around and she said, "Everyone here is your dad." Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess my dad's people have told him that the map of Ireland is written on his face. Everybody's ruddy. Everybody in my family is like got like, you know, bursting capillaries in their nose and kind of have that gross, ruddy, windswept sort of look.
I never heard it described that way. I gotta say, tell me why I'm wrong to react with judgment. When you say Irish Catholic from Boston, I automatically think of racial conflict and like, you guys are on your side of town, we're on our side of town.
You're 100% correct.
It's not unfair. I also think of John Kelly, the former chief of staff. I think
yes,
Lawrence
very much.
O'Donnell, those two guys, I think, because they're
William
from that.
Bratton, you know, has that sort of quality. You know, former police chief in New York. Yeah, I mean, John Kelly is the most Boston trash person you can imagine. And I grew up not necessarily, my town was a little bit further out from Boston where I grew up. I grew up about 45 minutes from Boston. And so it's much more like suburbia. But, you know, the accent there, it's very town to town. Like I grew up in a town called Acton, which was sort of an upper middle class town. Nobody really had that accent. You went one town over to Maynard, everybody had it.
Huh. Wow.
You know, I don't really know why that is, but yeah, it's a very parochial area. And there is definitely a, you know, what town are you from? You're not from my town. Stay in your town. You know,
what's your Catholic story? What's your relationship with religion?
I grew up, my uncle was a priest, kind of a controversial priest in the sense that he was,
social justice warrior. Or pedophile.
Well, considered liberal for 1970s Boston Catholic Archdiocese. Like, I guess he was, you know, in line to maybe be a bishop at a certain point, or an archbishop, I can't remember, or a cardinal. No, not a cardinal, but was passed over because he was, you know, controversial or whatever. He was
too progressive for them
at the time. I mean, for that, by today's standards, no. Right. But he was a canon lawyer, which means like he was a lawyer within the Catholic Church, like not in an actual civil court, but within the Catholic court. And he was a professor at a seminary. And he would say mass in my grandmother's living room growing up on all holidays. And so we would have to stand there, like 8 of us, and my cousins and I would have to do the readings, like, I'm reading a letter from Paul to the, I would have to do all that crap.
Wow.
And then around when I was like 13 or something, I went into my like hardcore atheist transition. I became very much like, your God is dead, and let me tell you why.
You're sanctimonious?
Yes. Oh, the worst. I mean, and I consider myself a lowercase atheist. If that, like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I want people to be happy. And a lot of people have that sort of attitude of, I don't believe in organized religion, but I believe in God. Whereas I'm the exact opposite. I don't believe in God, but I believe absolutely in sort of human organized institutions, and as a sort of vehicle for people to congregate and to do good and to meditate on what it means to be a better human being. And I've always had a lot of interest in religion in general. I took a lot of courses in college about, theism, atheism, and existentialism and stuff like that. I have, generally speaking, whatever gets you through the night policy when it comes to these things, but I am not a believer personally. But I do feel like if you are going to be a believer, I have way more respect for the sort of silly pageantry of Catholicism than I do for the sort of bland, uninspired Episcopalian horseshit.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting. because
like, if you're going to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I have a lot of thoughts about the pageantry in that it's just so boring and routine.
But it's magical. I mean, there's mystery to it. There's a. I mean, if you really get deep into it, of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, and it's cultures like that where things like pedophilia can really blossom, because there are these sort of man-made hierarchies and sort of mysteries and secrecy. You know, it's not a coincidence that and it's also the case a lot in. I don't want to step out of my lane here, but in a lot of Orthodox cultures, Hasidic culture, and, I mean, where there is sort of non-governmental hierarchies and sort of secrecy and mystery and ritual, that tends to be a breeding ground for, diddling.
It was such a thoughtful explanation.
I really stuck the landing there, didn't I? I was like, I know I was being so sensitive, and I was like, oh yeah, and then I just completely.
No, I really thought I was in a college course lecture. I was totally, as usual, listening to you and hanging on every word.
And then I sold you out. I pulled the rug out.
Well, I'm glad I asked about all that. That's really fascinating. And I would love to explore all of that more. But I definitely want to ask you about your move. Because first of all, I think it's always interesting to talk with somebody about moving, because they say it's like the most stressful thing in the world. So it's always interesting. But then you told me right before we started that there's this article in the New York Times opinion piece by a guy who's basically mad that people who left New York during the pandemic are coming back. And I guess that could put you in that category. You've been going back and forth the whole time. But
yeah, I'm in a slightly different category. But I mean, I understand his point. Yeah, his basic gist is like, fuck all you people who went back to your parents' house or went up to your cabins and now are coming back to the city and acting like we're all part of this together, when we've been in our shitty one-bedroom apartments in Crown Heights and you haven't. And I get it. I absolutely get it.
I don't. But, I haven't read the article. And you're, a very thoughtful guy. But I feel like human nature kind of determines this in terms of your opportunity. Like people. You could think of this in any other situation. If you had a place to go and you could make it work, then you went. How am I judging? I'm going to stay. I'm going to stick. I'm going to stick through. I'm a real. Fine. I don't give. Great if you want. But if you had a place to go and you went, how is that a bad thing? What am I missing? I haven't read the article. What's the argument?
A few points that I would make are, part of living in the city, as anyone who's spent any time here knows, is judging yourself by, am I a real New Yorker or not?
Does this extend to other cities? Sorry to interrupt you, but can this argument be made of other, cities and how people reacted during the pandemic? Or do you feel like
few?
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Probably not to the extent of New York. I bet there's probably some of that sentiment in Chicago. I don't think there's much of that sentiment in LA, but I could be wrong. I would say it has to be kind of apartment cities that really where you're feeling that, where people are stacked up on top of each other and there's density and congestion and whatnot. Yeah. Our situation was slightly different in the sense that, we lost our apartment. We had already given notice. We had planned on moving in May of 2020 and our lease ran out in January. And so we told our landlord, hey, we're not going to sign a new lease because we're planning on moving out at the end of April. Can we just go month to month? And then in March, the pandemic hit and we said to our landlord, oh, hey, things have changed. Do you mind if we stay? And he said no, because we had been there for 15 years. I'm sure he wanted to jack up the rent. And so he was thrilled that we were leaving. Right. And so, we didn't really have an option, and we had this cabin. We would have probably gone upstate anyway. So we put all of our stuff in storage and we've been splitting time, as you know, between upstate and the city. And when we've been in the city, we have lived at my wife's business. We have a mattress on the stage, or at least we had until last week. And so and I would have to shower with a little foot operated camping shower in the basement on a tarp. It was, so I feel like my bona fides are intact. How
did we never, or is there still an opportunity? No, you've moved to to do an interview during that, or at least make a video of you doing that. That would have been
there's
really
a little bit of
I would have
in,
paid to see that for sure.
Well, in the special I have shot that hasn't come out yet, but is in the process of being sold and will hopefully come out in the late spring. There's some doc footage of what that experience was, so that'll be exciting. It's
that's so great. I'm so happy to know that there is some footage of that.
It's called Show Your Work, and it'll come out hopefully in like May or June is my hope.
Well, I will be promoting the hell out of it, not only in the podcast, on social media, but I have a plan to do sandwich board. Wear sandwich board to promote your new special, because that's how
spinning signs. Could you stand and just spin one of those like little arrow type
I'll do
signs?
Whatever you want me to do, whatever you think will be most effective, I will do it. Very excited.
The grassiest of grassroots. Okay, no, but what I was saying before, getting back to what I was saying before, is that there's always a competition that New Yorkers have, even in their own minds, for like, how much of a New Yorker am I? Am I a real New Yorker? And never is that more acute than when you've been in the city for about 3 to 6 years, in my opinion. I think when you're there for a couple of years, you know you're not a real New Yorker. And then after like year 6 or 7 or 8, you stop giving a shit because you're just living your life. But in those middle years, it really means something to you. It's like, am I a real New Yorker? Am I more of a New Yorker than that person? Yep. And of course, this article was written by a guy who's lived here for 5 years.
He's in the window.
He's totally in the window. And I would offer as a counterpoint that you are not a real New Yorker until you get the fuck out at any opportunity. That is, to me, when you're a real New Yorker, when you get rid of that silly chip on your shoulder and you continue to live here, but look for opportunities. I had a joke in a show I did once. I did a one-man show that I never did anything with called The Gorgeous Mosaic, which is about The Gorgeous Mosaic, which was a quote from David Dinkins, where he had referred to New York City as a gorgeous mosaic. And so I did a one-person show once just about my relationship with the city. So this is something I've given a ton of thought about. But, you know, my wife desperately wanted to leave the city. And to me, that was a sign to me that she was a real New Yorker, because you're not a real New Yorker until you desperately want to leave, but for some reason don't.
I love that.
And so, you know, there's this whole psychology to what makes someone stay or go. So, you know, it's silly. I totally understand why people want to have those fights. And I can see amongst amongst people within the same generation, I can totally see it as a, you know, a line in the sand, or, you know, a pissing contest of like, where were you in 2020? I was here.
Yeah.
You know, going to the, you know, Delhi. But also, I feel like,
and we have that already. I roll that out constantly about 9/11.
Yeah. I mean, people do. I walked across the bridge, you know. Also, I feel like in those early days, especially in Queens, where I was, which was the epicenter in April of 2020, April, May, whatever.
Yeah. Of COVID.
That you were not doing anyone any favors by staying here. You were actually just creating more disease and congestion.
If you think of it that way, but if you're not supporting the local deli, much less paying your rent, you're not, you know, you're hurting the economy you're hurting the economy anytime you leave and stop buying stuff there, I suppose. But this is different, because in this case, this has always been about the economy versus public health and trying to find a balance. So you're absolutely right in that if you can leave, you're one less host, you're one less roach.
You're one less person in line at Gristedes or Key Food or whatever. You know, it's create a little space, buddy.
I think of Key Food, I always think of in the meat aisle a wrapped up chicken's foot claw.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I remember walking down the street and seeing a fried chicken drumstick, like an eaten fried chicken drumstick that still had the foot on it. Choice. It's like, wow, you fried it.
But I was so ignorant. I thought somebody made a mistake in the packaging. I was like, ooh, they put the wrong part of the chicken in here. Not, wow, people eat this. So let's talk about the move. I mean, you moved back and your apartment living in Queens.
Well, yeah, we found a place, and we actually kind of timed it perfectly, given that, you know, apparently venues are going to open up at 33% starting April 2nd. And so, you know, it was kind of a whim a couple weeks ago. You know, I've been obsessed for the past 7 months, I get, I've been getting Street Easy updates 2 or 3 times a day of, you give your parameters of, I'm looking for an apartment between X dollar and X dollar.
Street Easy is an apartment finder.
Yeah. It's like Zillow.
Didn't know that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But, and so I'd get these emails and, and you get that sort of, domestic apartment porn where you're like, oh, I could live there. Imagine this is where my dresser would go in this apartment.
Yeah.
And so I happened to just, see that there was an open house down the road, like that was happening at that moment, and QED was open, and it's my wife's business, and it was about to close. I was like, hey, if we leave now, we can go to this, we can call and make an appointment to go to this open house. And that place wouldn't take dogs, even though the listing said it did. Yeah, which is annoying. But
so you thought about getting rid of the dogs?
Oh, absolutely. I'd drop kick those fuckers. No.
Sorry, guys.
I'd sell my soul for those dogs. But the woman's like, the realtor was like, I actually have a place down the street, and it's literally maybe 100 yards from QED's front door.
Oh, it's that's amazing. So that's everything to me to not have a commute.
Amazing. Yeah. And so in the apartment itself, we kind of took it slightly sight unseen. Like we maybe should have done a little bit more research. I mean, we saw it, but at the time it was just kind of idle. We were like, yeah, this looks fine. And then we looked at they had a video online that we watched a few times. And then we just called and said, we'll take it. And we didn't do silly things that you should do. It's a pre-war building. It was built in like 1920 and not a lot of outlets. The bathroom is really, really small. There will be no more luxurious 30-minute dumps in my future.
Why? What is the space? How does that affect your dump?
It's just because it's one of those old, tiny little 1920 toilets, like the actual.
Oh, the toilet's too small.
It's tiny. And also, it doesn't even have a tank on the back. It has one of those elementary school flush handles.
I had that was my New York apartment sitch. Yep.
Yeah. And so, it's
But I
fine.
like that. I feel like that's a powerful flush, and I have less maintenance to be concerned with. But maybe they're problems.
That I agree with. But it's like I'm the kind of person who, and this might be a little too much information for your audience, but I like to hang out on my phone for 20 minutes.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I like to get some emails written. That sort of. Yeah, it feels like free time. It's me time. Whereas it doesn't feel like wasted time. Like if I were to just sit around surfing on the web, it'd be like, oh, I'm wasting time. It's like, no, I'm in the bathroom.
Yeah,
now.
You're multitasking, and it's a healthy thing. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, I of course like mindful dumps. I don't like any distractions. I stay focused. I don't do any reading. Actually, if you're ever
like Sting, but with dumps instead of sex.
The truth is.
Dump.
The truth is, and everybody's done this joke, I'm sure, that if you go to the bathroom, if you're dropping a deuce and you don't actually have something to read, it can be problematic or angst causing.
It's crazy to think, that
you would actually do a mindful.
If you forget to bring your phone with you, and you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do for the next 90 seconds?
I'm actually curious, and I hope that you'll tweet both of us. If anybody takes a quote mindful dump, or really just doesn't want to be distracted, or is that efficient or whatever, doesn't read. I think everybody takes their phone. Everybody.
There used to be an entire industry of books devoted to pooping. Do you remember the Uncle John's bathroom reader?
Yes. And you put them on. I still have those types of books on my tank.
Like I bet entirely that the New Yorker, the subscriptions to New Yorker have gone way down since people no longer read on the toilet, because that is pretty much where all New Yorkers would go to die. Is they would just be in a pile in the bathroom, and also Williams and Sonoma catalogs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I had an interesting childhood. Apparently, back to my dad, it was all skiing magazines and Corvette magazines.
Oh my gosh!
What kind of
wow?
Yeah, who wants to read either of those in July?
It's very 1980s to me. It feels very.
So the problem though with moving, and I think that everybody can relate to this, whether it's an apartment or a home on a street, is there's no app, and there ethically probably shouldn't be one, that describes who your neighbors are and what is going to come with all of that. And so that's always a risk. You've been tweeting a little bit about I think maybe one tweet. Are you having an issue already? Is there a concern with a neighbor?
Well, I think I know what you're referring to. My name is Christian. Finnegan. And you would think at this point in my life that I would understand that when you're meeting a neighbor, someone who you will be sharing a building with for the foreseeable future, you would think after 47 years, I would know to introduce myself by saying, hello, my name is Christian, rather than, hi, I'm Christian.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't always have the desired effect. I was bringing up a box yesterday because all of our stuff was in storage.
My friends, Jewish and Muslim, always know not to make that mistake.
They would know. I know. I did not get the I didn't get the memo.
I'll send you one.
You guys get the memo with it?
Hey, but that's the memo.
It's weird to think that like there's a whole generation of people who don't even know what that impression implies anymore.
It's
You
fine.
guys ever notice you read the paper?
Anyway, so I'm carrying this box up yesterday.
Nope, do the rest in Jay Leno. You're carrying a box.
Yeah, I'm carrying the box, and Judge Ito says to me,
Judge Ito. Now we really lost the millennials.
Cato Kalin.
Judge Ito.
So, I'm carrying this box, and this neighbor across the hall from me, he just says, I believe he's Latino, of some spoke on the Latino wheel, and he says, he's like, moving, huh? And I said, yeah. Sorry if I'm making noise. Like, oh, it's okay, whatever. And then I just said, I'm Christian, by the way. And he just froze, and he looks at me and he goes, okay. And then goes into his apartment. Like, that was not like, my name is whatever. And I get it. Like, that's got to be a real bummer. I mean, listen, believe what you want to believe. But if I've met you and within 20 seconds, you've told me what your overarching belief system is, that's a red flag. That is a red flag to me.
Even my friend communist knows better. I mean, but what was he supposed to? I mean, like he could have had so many funny responses, like, "Well, then you'll feel comfortable here," or "You might not love it here," or "Not my, it's none of my business." I mean, but that is
the vibe I got was definitely like, "Why are you telling me this? And what does this portend for the future?"
Would have been so funny if he told you his ethnicity. I'm Puerto Rican. See you later. You're back in New York, and
I've been in back and forth. I mean, I've probably 60% upstate, 40% in the city. It's probably over the past year.
And
maybe 70-30.
And things are, would you say, starting to return to normal?
Well, you can see it coming. And of course, there's that danger that we're all going to kind of go too fast with it. You know, that was the main thing that I was frustrated about when Texas prematurely said we're opening everything, is because there becomes a momentum that all states then feel like they have to follow suit, even if they don't want to, because you can't, if all the states around you are open for business and you're not, you're going to have a mutiny on your hands from business owners and exodus and things like that. Yeah. And so I was worried that it would become a ball rolling downhill. And I think that is happening to a degree. Luckily, from all intents, or from all signs, the vaccinations are moving faster than originally predicted, and things are moving pretty damn quick. I had my first shot last week. I have my second shot in a couple more weeks. By mid-April, I'll be, fully vaccinated and all that jazz. And so it's kind of a race to see, like, can we outrun the variants? But, I knew this was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen, or, I'm not a genius, but my prediction when in the late fall, when everyone was freaking out about people not following guidelines, is like, everybody just wants to have their holiday season. They want to go out shopping. They want to be able to, have some semblance of seasonal joy. And then come January 1st, I think people will naturally want to hole up again until spring. But then when spring hits, people are going to want to be outside again. And, that's kind of the arc of how this is going down, I think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I hope that you're right in terms of the variants, and the race is a great way of putting it. Real quick, how was your experience? Where did you get your vaccination? I mean, I still feel
City
like
Field. I was in and out. My wife and I had
Mets
Yeah,
stadium.
where the Mets play in Queens. My wife and I had polar opposite experiences. She was scheduled. We had a massive snowstorm a few weeks ago. Yep. You know, there was like 3 feet of snow, and her appointment got pushed back twice because of that. So when she finally had her appointment, there was a massive log jam of people, and so it took her 4 hours and 45 minutes to get through the whole thing. And I was sitting in the car waiting for her the whole time. And so I was prepared for the worst. And I went on Saturday and I walked in the front door at 7:00. And at 7:45, I was back in my car. And that includes the 15 minutes that they make you sit around waiting to make sure that you don't have any side effects afterwards. So it could not have been better.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that they did that. My wife just got hers and she didn't tell me that they did that. And I haven't heard that. But she also was in and out and before her appointment time. I, of course, have nothing that can get me close to the vaccine. I live in a shed and I am in elite shape.
Good shape. Yeah.
So I wanted
like the face you made when you said elite, like you were being humble, but you still wanted to get the point across that it was elite shape. You're like elite.
I wasn't going for humility. I wasn't. Sorry, but that was misconstrued. I actually am not. I've actually definitely got to get back to.
Yeah, you kind of look kind of fat.
I've gained maybe a couple of pounds, maybe like 3 or 4 pounds.
Noticed. It really
in the face,
bad.
Really? You can even see in the face.
The whole thing. No, I see your torso. It's
doughy. It looks soft.
Yeah,
I look soft.
Yeah. I really think you're kind of losing it.
I had a girl tell me the other day I had nice arms. I was talking to on video. Nice arms. Made me feel so good because I had a short sleeve shirt on. It's awesome.
Very nice.
Sit with that for a while.
Yeah, I remember a woman in college once told me I had nice calves, and I was like, I've never even thought about that, but apparently that means something.
No, I don't have that. I've been told many times I have the calves of a young boy or lady, which feels wrong. Your thoughts on finally the rescue package, the aid package. This is such a significant. We can talk about a lot of things that happened during the week, but this is the most potentially important aid package. People are calling it different things, referring to it differently, whatever you want, but significant, important policy passed in maybe a generation. It's being described by thoughtful economists and people who pay such close attention. Pretty big deal. Big effing deal, Christian.
I think it is. And I don't know that I had fully taken that in. Like, I kind of assumed a lot of it was just kind of like party spin, you know, which you need, you know, like when the Affordable Care Act came out, this is very important and all that. But seeing how many progressive people seem to be psyched about it. And I'm not talking about the professional Twitter progressives, you know, the sort of the people who are going to snipe at anything that's not, you know.
I like Eric Levitt, Steve Bannon, Paul Krugman, economists. I mentioned 3 white guys, but still guys
who are. Yeah, but you know, the representative from Connecticut who was advocating against child poverty for so long, I can't remember her name off the top of my head.
Is it?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, she's thrilled about it. You know, and all that stuff.
All the anti-poverty people are really thrilled by it. Yeah,
exactly. More than I, you know, and I think that for the past few weeks, even people who are maybe more in the sort of mainstream of the Democratic coalition kind of were suspicious about how much Democrats were going to negotiate against themselves. And of course, they had to do a little of that because we're fucking Democrats. And that's the way. We can't ever just go for what we want. We have to sort of hedge against ourselves. And so the unemployment was brought from 600 to 300, although I believe it was extended in time. So maybe that justifies it. But the concessions weren't that big. I think every time we heard about a concession, I think me and I think a lot of us were just kind of like, okay, here we go. This is where shit gets watered down. This is the Affordable Care Act all over again. Right. There goes the public option, like all that crap. You know, and they really seem to have kind of learned their lesson a little bit on this, and it's pretty exciting. And you know, I don't remember who was saying it last night, but it's a lot different than the Affordable Care Act in the sense that the Affordable Care Act was going to take years for anybody to see the benefit of it, whereas this is going to hit real quick for a lot of people. And a lot of people are going to, you know, really see an immediate impact in their lives. Yes. And that's fucking exciting, man. I don't think I've ever lived through something like that. I think I'm 90% uncynical about it.
Yeah, that's huge for you. Well, for anybody that's been paying attention, frankly, to, really close attention for as long as both of us have. So I should say me too. I think it's great. And I completely agree with you. And it's a great high note to end on because I absolutely am very excited about it. The least important question, but still important, is what is it? What will it mean politically? Will people remember in 2 years, much less 4, about this? But we can talk about that next time.
There's one more thing is that, a lot of these anti-poverty, this is, again, something I learned while listening to the news last night. This is not something I knew personally. A lot of these anti-poverty measures are set to expire or be renewed in 2 years, which was referred to, I believe, by Joy Reid or somebody as essentially a time bomb for Republicans, that this is going to come up for renewal in 2022.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. And so you're going to have a lot of people having to argue, unless this is like a complete boondoggle and like this, people look back and be like, oh my God, the Rescue Act was a massive failure. There's going to be a lot of public support behind extending this stuff. And you're going to see a lot of Republicans have to sort of do the dance, which is not a bad thing.
That is fascinating. I'm sure they're going to point to some kind of waste that they'll try to find, Blueberry Farms, Caterpillar study or something, and they'll demagogue the hell out of it the way they did something like Solyndra. But I think it's things have changed, and hopefully it won't make that much of a difference. Okay. Goodbye, Christian Finnegan. Thank you very much for joining me, and goodbye, Jay Leno.
See you later, Pete. It was good seeing me. I'm going to go drive a vintage car home.
Make those little noises after?
In my Jay Leno does.
And you love when we chat, and we chat every Friday. Support him. Let him know you heard him here on Twitter. Go to @ChristFinnegan. I'm Christian. All right. So joining me next is David Litt, who was a speechwriter for President Obama, joining his White House in 2011, leaving in 2016. And after his stint he was also the lead joke writer for a lot of the White House Correspondents Dinner monologues. And since leaving government, his work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Washington Post, and so much more. He was the head writer and producer for Funny or Die D.C. from 2016 to 2018. He's developed TV pilots for Comedy Central and ABC. And in the meantime, he's written 2 books, New York Times bestselling memoir, Thanks, Obama, My Hopey, Changey, White House Years, published in 2017, and his latest book, So Good, So Important, Democracy in One Book or Less, How It Works, Why It Doesn't, and Why Fixing It is Easier Than You Think, which was published last summer. We talked about his most recent article in The Atlantic titled, We Already Got Rid of the Filibuster Once Before, and I've linked to that in the show notes. He is on Twitter @DavidLitt. Here is my conversation with David Litt. David Litt right now. David, always great to have you on the podcast. The people love you. I love you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me back, as always.
Real quick, we were just talking before I press record, and I just wanted to get your reaction to kind of where we're at in pandemic world with the vaccines, I'm not going to say doubling, but every day millions more people arguably getting vaccinated. And there's this interesting feeling right here in the first third of March with so many Americans getting vaccinated. You said you were going to see family. I'm going to see my parents. How do you describe kind of where we're at and how we're feeling before we get into all the politics?
Well, I think for everybody it's different, but the sense I get around, the country, just talking to friends, following people online, whatever, is that the dam seems to be breaking. Like we're finally, that the end is hopefully in sight. And of course, I hope I didn't just jinx, the entire vaccine rollout now. This is going to be the moment. But I think it is, I don't want to make this too political because it's not for most people. But I think you saw the Biden team come in early on and say, let's just try to be competent. Let's show people what we can do if the United States government is like a competent, well-run organization. And this is the best proof point for like, hey, America can still do stuff. Suddenly America's doing a pretty good job at the vaccine rollout. And it's because you have people in charge who are trying to do a good job. And it's making a huge difference, not like, in the politics of it, but just in like people being able to see their families again. It's a big moment.
Let me just ask you about the Biden team. You, of course, were on the Obama team, and it was such a different time in many ways. I feel like you guys had a lot to learn and were shocked by, to some extent, the obstruction of Republicans and the divisive nature of that election and everything that happened after it. you look at the Biden team and like the Obama team, a lot of superstars that are smart people that can make a lot of money in the private sector, but they want to go to work for this administration because they really think they can make a difference. And there's so many people that I know, and other people I know that they talk about this team as being really, really impressive in all kinds of different agencies and, of course, in the administration itself. And my question to you is, how much of a difference does it make when you have smart, thoughtful people that care about governing if you still have this intransigence on the right, which is similar, and now it's boiled over to conspiracy world? How much of a difference does a great team make?
It makes a huge difference. I mean, I think the best proof point for the kind of difference that a team can make is we had 4 years of people who were incompetent or unethical or both running almost all of the federal government. And
they were trying to destroy their agencies. I want to just take it more further. Like, they weren't trying to they were trying to destroy the actual agency, whether it be EPA, the post office, or anywhere else. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's such a different goal.
So sometimes you had people actively trying to sabotage government. I mean, the other thing you had, especially as the Trump administration continued, is that like the A team and the B team among Republicans, right, the smartest policy minds, didn't want to join the administration by and large. There were a few exceptions, but for the most part, you ended up with the C team running the show. And that means that when it came to the level of competence, and take aside the morality and the ethics, which are those are important. But just when it came to a matter of competence, you had people who did not know what they were doing trying to run the government. And especially in a crisis, right? Especially when the COVID pandemic hit, you saw a combination of ineptitude and, ideology and malice coming together. And I mean, I just saw a statistic. This was the first year, the 2020, since 1947, when more than 1% of Americans' population died. I mean, that's stunning. And so in a weird way, the Trump administration was
along with that statistic, the birth rates being record low, I think matters. Sorry.
Right. I mean, you're I guess the long and short of it is the pandemic was not good. This was bad. And particularly, I think we may lose sight of this. It was much worse in the United States than in many other developed democracies. And we tell ourselves America's the greatest country in the world. I still think that, we certainly have that capacity when we set our minds to it. And the response from the United States was so much worse than so many countries. So, normally we kind of think we're number one. And when it came to our pandemic response, we were like, well, at least we're like ninth from last, which is not how we think about America. This is a very long way of saying the last 4 years were a perfect example of what happens when government is run by people who don't care about governing or actively seek to undermine governing. And now we're seeing what happens when government is run by people who care about governing and want government to help people. It doesn't mean that people are perfect. It doesn't mean that every decision goes well or that every government agency functions smoothly. They certainly don't all function that way. But government is huge. It can do a lot for a lot of people if we set our minds to it. And so that's what we're seeing right now. And that's all 30,000 feet. That's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is just like grandparents can hug their grandkids again all over the country. Yeah. And that would not have happened this early if you had a different set of people in charge.
So but okay, going back to my question specifically is, can, all these smart folks working in the Biden administration, can they make a major difference? I mean, you did. I'm not saying you didn't answer it. You did. But just more succinctly about, can they make a difference if Republicans won't let them?
I just want to point out that is even more cutting and accurate that you were like, you didn't not answer the question. You just answered it in a long-winded, boring way. Fair enough. Not the case
at all. And neither do you write that way. I love listening to you, and I was hanging on your words, but I still I want to get your reaction to the specific part of the Republican intransigence, because it matters so much.
No, this is the short version. I wasn't saying that because I disagreed. The short version is, there's a lot you can do by executing in government, right? It's the executive branch. So we tend to focus on legislation, and you need legislation to accomplish a lot of big things. But at the same time, when you set the entire executive branch toward a set of clearly defined goals, there's an enormous amount you can do. Some of that is executive orders the president himself can sign. Some of it is also just making sure that the people in the agencies are focused on doing their jobs in the right way and have what they need to do their jobs in the right way. I mean, you have, many people working for the federal government who are not political, who are career people who really know what they're doing, but they need leadership who can enable them to do what they do well and also like set them up to succeed, right? It's like any other organization. So the odds, unless we get rid of the filibuster, which I guess we'll get into, but the odds right now of passing a slew of important laws are smaller than they would otherwise be if you had a functional Congress. But having a functional executive branch does an enormous amount of good.
I want to just read you a tweet from David Frum and get your reaction to it. The overlooked possibility that good-natured Senate veteran Joe Biden might actually trust his former Republican colleagues less than frosty Senate freshman Obama. What do you think of the possibility that Joe Biden knows that he can't work with these Republicans more than Obama certainly aspired to?
Well, I think it has less to do with their time in the Senate and more to do with their time in the White House. Over the 8 years that President Obama served as president and Joe Biden served as vice president, over and over again, we tried, we wondered, we hoped, right, to try to figure out a way to bring Mitch McConnell to the table. And the only way that worked, he would come to the table, but only if the alternative was worse, right? During the fiscal cliff fight or the debt ceiling fight, not the first one, but the second one in 2013, where they shut down the government. Yeah. And the political cost of obstruction became worse than the political cost of negotiation. They would negotiate. They would do their jobs. But over and over again, we saw that this is not a Republican Party that particularly cares about deliberation or compromise and is willing to tank the entire government in order to keep the duly elected president from being able to enact the agenda that he was elected to enact. And so I think you see the Biden team, they're going in, I should say, way more trusting or way more hopeful, that's a better word, of Republicans than, a lot of activists would be, right? They're saying, let's give it a shot. But they're taking, to use a Reagan phrase, they're taking a trust but verify approach, right? Maybe this is going to work out, but we're not going to count on it. That would be silly.
Yeah, great insight, and definitely the time in the White House is the better argument. Your book, Democracy in One Book or Less, puts you in a place for me as someone who I can talk to, who can explain things in a way that I can understand, often using history to make the point. And that's what you did with your most recent article at The Atlantic titled, "We Already Got Rid of the Filibuster Once Before." Never knew anything about this, David Litt. It's a great read. It's very relevant, even though it took place over 100 years ago. And I went down a rabbit hole after reading this and want to learn all about a guy named Thomas Brackett Reed, a former Speaker of the House, who you write was a 6'3", 300-pound Civil War veteran who favored walrus mustaches and an all-black attire. That was the sentence I needed to leave the Atlantic website and go Google image Thomas Brackett Reed. But what did he do that's so important, sir, and why?
Well, before we get into what Thomas Brackett Reed did, I just also want to make it clear he was known, other than for the story I'm about to tell, for just like vicious put downs of other members of Congress.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was his trademark was basically just like skewering people in debates. So there was a
is there any YouTube videos of that? I want to see it.
Sadly, no. The 1890s YouTube has been lost to history because it never existed. But there was a colleague of his who at one point, he gave a big speech and he said, "I would rather be right than be president." And Thomas Reed said, "The gentleman need not worry. He will never be either." It's like, boom. And so, he was like, he was basically Twitter before, like good Twitter before there was good Twitter.
I love a hard slam, by the way. You can't do it anywhere else, but I love a hard slam that begins with "the gentleman," but it only takes place in the halls of government.
Yeah. Halls of government and it was the 1890. Right. I assume everyone just referred to each other as gentlemen all the time.
Right.
Anyway, so Thomas Reed, after a sort of congressional career of being like, the number one dispenser of one-liners, he then becomes Speaker of the House. Now, in 1890, and this is the thing that almost nobody knows, right? We know about the Senate filibuster. People talk about it a lot. This rule that requires a supermajority of senators to pass any bill, in its current form, at least. In the House, we think that it's a majority rules organization, and people assume it always has been. But in fact, that's not true. The House had a filibuster, and the House filibuster. I know, and I get into it a little bit in the article, but I can skip it here because it's like complicated and procedural. The short version is that the House filibuster worked similarly to the way the Senate one did. So you needed a supermajority of House members in order to pass any law. Now, in 1888, the party roles were basically reversed. So Democrats believed in small government. They were the party of, the Southern obstructionism, what was going to become Jim Crow. They just sort of generally, and then just totally flip it, right? The Republicans were the party of more civil rights, more active government, more public investment. And the Republican Party, for the first time in 16 years, won all three chambers, in Washington. They won the White House, they won the Senate, and they won the House. And so in some ways, it was sort of analogous to this moment, right? The party that believed in government taking a strong and effective role suddenly had power, but also because of the slim majority that the Republicans held, everybody assumed that they couldn't actually get anything done. Now, the slim majority for Democrats today is in the Senate. For Republicans back then was in the House. And Thomas Brackett Reed, the Speaker of the House, using his own understanding of House procedure, he had like a Mitch McConnell level understanding of House rules. Right. He single-handedly figured out a way to end the House filibuster. And the debate over ending it, I mean, you can call it a debate. It made what's happening today look like nothing. But what is really important for us to recognize is that the objections that people had to ending the filibuster in the House were really similar to the ones they have to ending the filibuster in the Senate today. And it was totally messy. I mean, I don't want to overstate how, they want to pretend it was easy to get rid of the filibuster. But in the end, we got rid of the House filibuster. And because of that, the House of Representatives is, far from perfect, but it is a functional legislative body today, and the Senate is not. So I think there's, I hope senators will take a look at that history when they think about what they want the Senate to look like.
Well, that's why it matters, because history matters. But it seems that we get so used to norms like 9 Supreme Court justices or, needing a supermajority to pass anything, or as you just talked about in the House. But we try to then point out, and both sides do this in Congress and floor speeches and in the media, that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that this was the norm. And we changed that for whatever reason. It's not in the Constitution. So why does it matter to today? And what do you think that I think we're now talking about the Senate, they should do with the filibuster?
So I'll start at the end of your question. I think it's time to get rid of the Senate filibuster. I think you should be able to pass a law with 51 Senate votes, period. Now, I don't know that that's going to happen this Congress, because I don't think that such a clean elimination of the filibuster is going to be acceptable to some of the Democrats. And the Democrats don't have a big majority, so you need every single one of them on board. But I think that would make the most sense, clearly. I think the reason these historical arguments matter, I mean, the biggest trick Mitch McConnell ever pulled was convincing us that all of these things that are relatively new are settled debates, right? So the idea that the filibuster has been around forever, it's institution. Well, the filibuster wasn't in the Senate originally. It was created a couple years later by accident, and it's been changing basically every generation ever since. And so going back through the history of it, going back through the history of how the House used to work, going back through the history of American politics, it just helps us understand we've been here before. We've had these debates before, and we know for a fact, right, what McConnell and his allies say is that if you end the filibuster, it will destroy the Senate, right? If you end the filibuster, it destroys the legislative body, right, and it won't work anymore. Well, we know for a fact that's not true. Now, it may happen in this case. It may not. It's a small sample size. But the apocalyptic rhetoric that we're hearing from defenders of the filibuster is demonstrably false because of the history. And the other thing that I think is demonstrably false is this idea that the filibuster is what distinguishes the Senate from the House, because the senators were, acting very superior to their colleagues in the lower chamber back in the 1800s when both houses had a filibuster. So the filibuster is not the defining characteristic of the Senate, in the sense that it's existed in other places. The filibuster is different in the Senate and in some ways has shaped the Senate more thoroughly than in the House. But it's not something that only exists in the Senate, and it's not something that the Senate couldn't survive if you got rid of it. We know it could.
I wonder if you know of any smart, progressive policy experts or writers that you read or are arguing otherwise. I can't find anybody, David Litt, that is really saying something different than what you're saying, not always as articulately and using the historical precedent the way that you do so well. But I mean, it seems like the only progressives or Democrats that are arguing to keep the institution the way it is are a few Senate Democrats. Like everybody across the spectrum, it seems is, even though it's a fair debate to some extent, I can't find too many people arguing otherwise. Have you?
I think that I'm trying to phrase this correctly. I think the debate has changed fundamentally.
Yeah.
Right? The people who are still arguing that the filibuster is useful, it's a lonely and lonelier group. Yes. I will say, Richard Ehrenberg, who's a professor, I think at Brown, and worked in the Senate for Democrats for maybe 30 years, a long time. He's written about why he believes the filibuster is essential to the Senate, and he still defends it pretty regularly. I think he's probably the sort of Senate procedure expert who I would consider as like an authority, who makes the strongest pro-filibuster argument. You also see a lot of Democrats, both for political and in some cases for kind of institutional reasons, that they're saying, let's not end the filibuster, let's amend it. Right. So Norm Ornstein, who's a scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, right, that's a right-wing group, but he is not. He has put forward a bunch of interesting ideas about how you might reform the filibuster. I think those measures tend to be too clever by half, but on the other hand, they have a much higher chance of actually happening this Congress. And I think there's some merit to them. I don't happen to agree with them, but I think there's a lot of good arguments you could make. So there's definitely a spectrum, right? There's a lot of people who are thinking about reforms to the filibuster. There are some people, although a smaller and smaller number, who believe that the filibuster should be essentially unchanged. And then you have a growing number of people who are saying, well, I don't really see a way out, because the filibuster, once you decide the filibuster is going to go away someday, right? Once we start talking about it, it becomes inevitable, because the next time Republicans have the Senate, the White House, and the House, they're going to get rid of the filibuster if they think it serves their purposes. And we know that Mitch McConnell doesn't care about precedent and procedure.
Right.
So once it becomes this kind of foregone conclusion, it's very hard not to justify doing it now. Right. Whereas if you could say maybe it'll be around forever, then you have stronger arguments for keeping it.
I want to talk to you about what a lot of folks think is the most important and imminent issue that we have to deal with right now, and that's access to voting or voting suppression. And it's so frustrating, I feel, David, that we can't argue and use our resources and our energy to fight for climate policy, tax policy, economic opportunity, health policy, and all these other initiatives that we're in dire need of. Obviously, we have to focus on, getting the vaccines and COVID and the public health conversation surrounding that, because we have to first talk about voting. Ari Berman on Twitter a couple days ago, on March 7th, 1965, John Lewis was brutally beaten marching for voting rights in Bloody Sunday in Selma. This 56 years later, Republicans have introduced 253 new voter suppression laws in 43 states. This is why we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act. So this seems to be the most important issue right now. I wish it wasn't, but we've got to fight this right now. How are you seeing it? How are you looking at it? How concerned are you about it?
Well, let me start by saying I don't think we have to say this is a choice between doing something about climate, doing something about immigration, and protecting democracy, right? Protecting democracy is how we do something about climate. It is how we reform our immigration system. And that's because the American people, the clear majority of the American people, want to see these things happen. The only question, or the biggest question facing America right now is a minority of people whose views do not represent most of us allowed to control what our government does in a representative democracy? And that is the sort of crux of the question. And so I would say, I think it's important to be extraordinarily vigilant about these laws. We can go into some of the details. The biggest thing I would say is we have to balance. On one hand, we need to be vigilant. On the other hand, we don't need to be despairing about this. I think we are ultimately going to make sure that these laws backfire. I think we're going to be able to beat some of them in court. I think we're going to be able to make sure that Republicans can't run the same playbook they ran in 2010, where they got away with a lot of this stuff and no one noticed. So we absolutely have to be making sure that we stay focused on this. I do agree that this is the single most important issue facing America right now because it underlies all those other issues. But there's the danger of saying, oh no, we're all screwed. Well, we might be, but not if we do something about it. We still have the power to fix this.
All right. Final question is, are there any shows, television shows or movies that most accurately depict your time working in the Obama White House? Or even just a scene from one, because I am so curious and fascinated and obsessed with what that would be like. And I watch all those movies and shows, well, most of them. And right now I'm watching, it's, in the can, it's on Netflix, like 8 seasons worth, Madam Secretary. And I don't care what you think about me that I'm watching that show, David. I really like it. I really like Tim Daly and Téa Leoni and even the parts about their marriage in that show. So I really don't care for your judgment about me or that show. I do, however, want to know if there is an answer to anything that accurately depicts your time in the White House and that's ever been portrayed on film or television.
Well, I don't know why you think I'd be particularly judgy of Madam Secretary, but
because it's a network show and some smart, like hoity-toity guy like you who appreciates good art and original things would shit on that. Plus, you have the personal experience to be able to do that. No,
I like network shows, and that's a different question. But it's the same. If you believe in majoritarian politics, right, you should believe in network television. Okay. You can have this conversation more broadly, but like things that appeal to lots of people.
All right, fair enough.
And I will say, a friend of mine who wrote for Madam Secretary. We were talking about my job at one point. I forget which season this was, but I was talking about commencement season being a thing for speechwriters. And I think that actually made it into.
I watched that episode last night.
Well, my friend Alex wrote that episode, and I assume it was after we had, part of it at least was based on a conversation we had. So that answers your question a little bit. I would say the thing that, I'm not the only one to say this by any means. The thing basically all of my White House colleagues have said about the White House is that it's roughly 80% Veep and 20% the West Wing, right? So 20% of the time you are involved in these enormous historic moments where you're part of something bigger than yourself. And also where like America is better at the end of the day than it was when you started the day. And in some small way, that's because of what you did. And it's extraordinary. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. And then 80% of the time you're just like trying to figure out, like how come you printed something to the wrong printer and it's going to be really embarrassing. So you're running around this giant office building trying to figure out, which printer that that email got printed out on. Or you're waiting to like 2 p.m. because that's when the buffet in the White House cafeteria has 30% off all the hot food. Right. Like it's random stuff. So I think, there's no one show, but I think those two, if you smash them together, you get a pretty good sense of what it was like.
I knew you'd give me a great answer on that. And I'm glad I want to connect with your friend or just tell Alex that I love the show.
OK, I certainly will.
David Litt, always a pleasure to have you join me here on the podcast. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Yeah, always fun to be here.
There you go. David Litt at David Litt on Twitter, davidlitt.com. L-I, that's 2 T's, ladies and gentlemen. Always a great conversation. Christian Finnegan, David Litt. That is the Friday episode of Stand Up. Thank you very much for listening to it. Thank you very much for supporting me on it. And if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription yet, go ahead and do it now. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes. And I thank you very, very much. I hope you have an awesome weekend if you're listening Friday, and I will talk to you Monday. I've got Tim Wise joining me, historian and foreign policy expert Michael Pembroke next week, and so much more. Let me know who you want to hear, and thank you for listening today. Take it away, John Carroll.
Stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you gotta stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to